Hello everyone, I'm your storyteller and today I'm here to lead you into the shadows. I know you're using this video to help you sleep, so before we begin, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching. Lay back comfortably, relax, and let's begin. Part 1. It was the fall of 2018 when Olivia and her fiancé, Ethan, decided to book a weekend getaway. They had been stressed from their hectic city lives, juggling demanding jobs and wedding preparations. A secluded Airbnb in a small, quiet village seemed like the perfect escape. The house, built in the late 1800s, was described in the listing as a charming historical gem with a rustic ambiance. Nestled on the edge of a dense forest, the house seemed inviting enough in the photos. Large bay windows, wooden shutters, and a porch that overlooked rolling hills. The host's reviews were glowing, though one stood out vaguely warning. Beautiful, but definitely has a character of its own. Bring a flashlight. Olivia and Ethan laughed it off, assuming it was about the house's age. The drive was long and winding. By the time they arrived, twilight had already painted the sky a deep orange. Ethan parked the car on the gravel driveway, the crunching sound echoing eerily in the stillness. The house stood before them, much older than the pictures suggested. As they stepped out, Olivia couldn't shake a strange feeling. The air felt heavier here. Ethan shrugged it off, saying, "Just the countryside. Let's get inside before it gets dark." The key was in the lockbox by the door, just as the host had promised. Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood polish and something earthy, like damp soil. The furniture was antique, the walls adorned with faded family portraits whose eyes seemed to follow them. "This place is a little creepy," Olivia muttered, running her hand along a dusty mantelpiece. Ethan grinned. "It's old world charm. Come on, let's make the best of it." They spent the first evening exploring the house. The kitchen had cast iron pans hanging from the ceiling. The living room boasted a massive fireplace, and upstairs the bedrooms had heavy four-poster beds. But one room at the end of the hallway was locked. By nightfall, the house grew unsettlingly quiet. Olivia and Ethan sat in the living room sipping wine. The fireplace crackled softly, but the shadows it cast seemed to dance, unnaturally. Olivia's unease deepened when she heard what sounded like faint footsteps upstairs. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Ethan paused, listening. "Nothing. It's an old house, probably just settling," he reassured her, but his tone was less confident than his words. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Olivia noticed something odd. The mirror on the bedroom wall was fogged up, as if someone had just taken a hot shower. "Ethan, did you go into the bathroom earlier?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, why?" She didn't respond, her heart racing as she wiped the glass. For a brief second, she thought she saw something move in the reflection, a figure standing in the doorway behind her. But when she spun around, no one was there. At 3:07 a.m., Olivia woke up to a loud thud. She sat up, her breath visible in the freezing air. The heater must have gone out, she thought, but that didn't explain the sound. She nudged Ethan awake, but he groggily waved her off. Gathering her courage, Olivia stepped into the hallway. The house was pitch black, save for the faint glow of moonlight streaming through the windows. She followed the noise to the locked door at the end of the hall. It was ajar. Her heart pounded as she pushed it open. The room was small, almost like a storage space, but what caught her eye was the dusty dollhouse sitting in the center of the floor. It was a miniature replica of the Airbnb itself. Inside the dollhouse, tiny figures were arranged in unsettling detail. Two figurines were seated at a table in the miniature living room. One had long brown hair, tied back just like Olivia's, and the other wore glasses, just like Ethan. The blood drained from her face. As she leaned closer, the tiny figures moved. Before she could scream, a cold hand gripped her shoulder. She spun around, but no one was there. The door slammed shut behind her, plunging her into darkness. She fumbled for her phone, using its flashlight to find her way out. Back in the bedroom, Ethan was sitting upright, his eyes wide with terror. "I heard it too," he whispered. "What?" Olivia stammered. "The footsteps. They're in the house." The sound of creaking floorboards echoed above them, moving faster now, almost like someone or something was running. Grabbing their belongings, Olivia and Ethan bolted for the car. As they sped away, they looked back at the house. A shadow stood in the window, watching. Weeks later, Olivia checked the Airbnb listing, curious to see if anyone else had stayed there. The listing was gone, replaced by a single newspaper article from 1994, "Family found dead in historic home. Cause of death unknown." Part 2. It was late October 2019 when Tom started his new job as a night shift security guard. The job was simple: monitor the cameras, patrol the premises once every hour, and ensure the building stayed secure. The facility was an old distribution warehouse on the outskirts of town. Long dark hallways and rows of abandoned offices made the place eerily quiet at night. But the paycheck was good, and Tom wasn't one to turn down steady work. Tom was in his mid-30s, an ex-military man trying to settle into civilian life. His wife Claire was pregnant with their first child, and every dollar counted. He was used to being alert, to keeping a sharp eye on things, but even he had to admit, there was something about the warehouse that felt off. On his first few shifts, nothing unusual happened. He spent most of his time in the control room, sipping coffee and watching the flickering monitors. But by his third night, things began to change. Around 2 a.m., Tom noticed something strange on the screen. In one of the far corridors, a shadow darted across the camera view. He leaned closer, rewound the footage, and watched again. It wasn't a glitch. Something or someone had moved. "Probably just a bird," he muttered, though his voice sounded hollow in the empty room. Still, protocol was protocol. He grabbed his flashlight and made his way to the corridor. The hallway was long and cold, the kind of cold that felt unnatural. His footsteps echoed as he walked, flashlight beams sweeping left and right. He reached the spot where the movement had appeared. Nothing seemed out of place except for one thing. A door that should have been locked was slightly ajar. Tom's hand hesitated on the handle. He pushed the door open slowly. Inside was an empty storage room, shelves lined with dusty boxes. He shone his light around, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Then faintly he heard it. A whisper. He froze, his heart pounding. The sound was faint, unintelligible, but definitely there. It seemed to be coming from the far corner of the room. He took a step closer, then another, but as he approached, the whisper stopped. The room was empty. Back in the control room, Tom tried to shake off the unease. He rewound the footage again, looking for an explanation, but this time the shadow wasn't there. He rubbed his eyes, frustrated. Maybe he was just tired. But as the hours went on, the sense of unease grew. At 3:30 a.m., the sound started, a rhythmic tapping, like knuckles against glass. Tom scanned the monitors, his stomach twisting in knots. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, until it seemed to echo through the control room itself. Then he saw it. On one of the cameras, near the loading dock, a figure stood motionless. It was tall and shrouded in darkness, its features impossible to make out. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. It just stood there, staring directly at the camera. Tom's blood ran cold. He grabbed his radio, but the static was deafening, drowning out any signal. With no other choice, he grabbed his flashlight and headed for the loading dock. His breaths were shallow, his footsteps quick. When he reached the dock, it was empty. No figure, no sound, just the same eerie silence that had filled the warehouse all night. But then he felt it. A presence. The hairs on his neck stood on end as a cold breeze brushed past him. He turned, his flashlight sweeping the shadows. And then, just for a moment, he saw it. The figure was standing at the far end of the dock, motionless. But this time its face was visible, pale, featureless, and staring directly at him. Tom stumbled back, his flashlight clattering to the ground. When he looked up again, the figure was gone. At the end of his shift, Tom reported the incident to his supervisor, but they dismissed it as paranoia or a prank. Yet when he reviewed the footage one last time, he noticed something chilling. On the final frame of the loading dock camera, the figure was standing outside the building, staring up at the lens. Its hand was pressed against the glass, and on the camera feed, a single word was smeared in fog. Part 3. Emily had always been a morning person. Her small apartment, perched on the 5th floor of a modest building in Portland, was usually flooded with sunlight by 7 a.m. She loved those quiet moments, sipping coffee as the world outside slowly came to life. But this morning, October 12th, 2019, felt different. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe it was the faint humming noise she thought she heard during the night, or the cold draft that had somehow slipped through her closed windows. Shaking off the unease, she chalked it up to her overactive imagination. Standing in front of the mirror in her bathroom, Emily began her routine. She brushed her teeth, humming softly to herself, and pulled her hair into a ponytail. Her reflection mimicked her every move. At least that's what she thought at first. It started small. As she leaned closer to inspect a blemish on her cheek, she noticed her reflection didn't seem quite right. Her face in the mirror lingered a fraction of a second longer than her actual movements. She tilted her head. The reflection followed, but not immediately. She blinked. The reflection didn't. Her breath caught in her throat. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, forcing a laugh to break the tension. She splashed her face with cold water and glanced back at the mirror. Everything seemed normal again. Emily shook her head and turned off the tap. As she reached for the towel, something in the corner of her eye stopped her. Her reflection was still facing the sink, even though she had turned toward the door. Emily froze, her hand gripping the edge of the countertop. "What the hell?" she whispered. Slowly she turned back to the mirror. Her reflection now stared directly at her, but the expression on its face was wrong. The slight smile on its lips didn't match Emily's growing terror. Her chest tightened as the reflection raised a hand. Emily hadn't moved. The sound of the towel dropping to the floor startled her. She stumbled back, her heart racing. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. "Stop it," she said aloud, her voice trembling. "This isn't real." The reflection tilted its head, its grin widening unnaturally. It mouthed words she couldn't hear, its lips moving too quickly to follow. Emily's knees buckled, and she braced herself against the wall. Suddenly the lights flickered. The room was plunged into darkness for a moment, and when the lights returned, her reflection was gone. But the mirror wasn't empty. A shadow moved across the glass, slowly forming into a shape. It wasn't hers. It wasn't human. Emily stumbled backward, her breath coming in gasps. The figure in the mirror stepped closer, its eyes hollow and its face twisted into an expression of malice. It raised a hand, pressing it against the glass. The mirror cracked beneath its touch, thin lines spreading outward like a spider web. Emily ran. She bolted from the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. Her heart pounded as she grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter, her hands trembling too much to unlock it. Then she heard it, a faint scratching sound. It was coming from the bathroom door. Emily's breathing quickened as the scratching grew louder. She backed away, her eyes darting around the room for anything she could use to defend herself. Her gaze fell on a heavy ceramic vase by the couch. The bathroom door creaked open. "No," she whispered, clutching the vase in both hands. The air grew colder and the lights in the apartment dimmed. The shadow emerged from the bathroom, but it didn't walk. It glided, its distorted form flickering as though it struggled to maintain its shape. Its hollow eyes locked onto Emily. She screamed and hurled the vase. It shattered against the figure, but it didn't stop. It reached out, its long, gnarled fingers stretching toward her. Emily ran for the front door, fumbling with the locks. Her hands were slick with sweat and her vision blurred with tears. She could feel it behind her, the icy air chilling her skin. With a desperate yank, she threw the door open and stumbled into the hallway. The apartment building was silent. Emily's cries echoed off the walls as she sprinted for the stairwell. She didn't dare look back. When she reached the street, she collapsed onto the sidewalk, her chest heaving. She looked up at her apartment window. The lights were still on, and in the bathroom window she saw it. The shadow. It stood there, motionless, watching her. The reflection in the mirror was gone, but deep down Emily knew it wasn't finished with her.